They froze my bank accounts, took my car, destroyed my reputation. His mother thought a woman with nothing would just disappear quietly into the night. But what she didn't know, I'm an accountant, and I'd just discovered their family was hiding 15 years of fraud worth millions of dollars. Before I tell you how I made them pay me $7 million and beg for mercy, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Because what happened next? They never saw it coming. And trust me, you need to hear how a woman they tried to erase became the one person they feared most. This is the true story of how I went from sleeping on my cousin's couch to owning my own house, and how the family that destroyed my life learned the hardest lesson they'll ever learn. Never underestimate a woman who knows where the bodies are buried. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, sometimes I sit in my living room now, looking out at the garden I planted with my own hands, and I think about how close I came to losing everything. How close they came to erasing me completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before they tried to break me. My name is Sarah, and 5 years ago, I was living a good life in Chicago. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd worked my way through community college while waitressing, then finished my degree in accounting at night school. By the time I turned 30, I had my own small consulting business, helping local shops manage their money. My parents had passed when I was young, but they'd taught me something important. They taught me that knowledge is power, and nobody can take your education away from you. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I had a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood, drove a reliable car that I'd bought used, and had enough in savings to feel secure. That security meant everything to me. When you've grown up with nothing, when you've seen your parents struggle to keep the lights on, you learn to value every dollar you earn. Then I met James at a community fundraiser. He was volunteering at the same event, serving food alongside me. Tall, kind smile, dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt. We talked while we worked, laughing about the chaos of trying to feed 200 people with only 3 working burners. He seemed so down to earth, so different from what I later learned he really was. What I didn't know that night was that James came from serious money. His family owned a massive real estate development company in Chicago. They'd built half the luxury condos in the city, owned shopping centers, office buildings. His father had started the business 40 years ago, and now his mother, Patricia, ran it like a military general. But James didn't tell me any of this at first. We dated for 8 months before he even mentioned his family's wealth. By then, I'd fallen for who I thought he was. A kind man who listened when I talked about my dreams, who seemed to genuinely care about my little business, who made me laugh. When he finally took me to meet his family at their estate in the suburbs, I was shocked. The house was enormous, sitting on 5 acres with a gate and security cameras everywhere. His mother, Patricia, answered the door in a designer suit even though it was Saturday afternoon. She looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. She shook my hand with 2 fingers, the kind of handshake that tells you someone doesn't really want to touch you at all. His younger sister, Rebecca, was worse. She barely looked up from her phone when James introduced us, just gave this little wave, and went back to scrolling. The dinner that night was torture. Patricia asked questions that seemed polite on the surface, but were actually designed to remind me I didn't belong. So Sarah, James tells me you went to community college. How practical. Where did your family come from originally? When I mentioned my parents had both worked in factories, she made this sympathetic sound that felt more like pity than kindness. But James was sweet to me that night. He held my hand under the table. He changed the subject when his mother got too pointed with her questions. On the drive home, he apologized for them and promised they'd warm up. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. 6 months later, he proposed. It was simple and perfect, just the 2 of us at the park where we'd had our first date. The ring was beautiful but not flashy. I said yes without hesitation because I loved him, and I thought he loved me too. The wedding was 3 months later, and that's when everything started to shift. Patricia insisted on planning everything. She chose the venue, a country club I'd never even heard of. She picked my dress, or rather, she brought me to a boutique and pointed at the one she thought was appropriate. She controlled the guest list, reducing my side of the family and friends to just 20 people while James's side had over 200. I remember standing at that wedding, looking out at a sea of faces I didn't know, and feeling so alone. My cousin Lisa was there, and my old college roommate, but they looked as lost as I felt among all these people in expensive suits and designer dresses. When my cousin gave a toast about how proud she was of me for building my business from nothing, I saw Patricia's face tighten. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. After the wedding, James wanted me to move into a condo his family owned downtown. It was beautiful, all modern and sleek, but it didn't feel like home. More importantly, it was owned by his family's company. I should have seen the warning sign there, but I was so in love, so hopeful that everything would work out. The first few months of marriage were strange. James started spending more time at family business meetings. He'd come home late, distracted, distant. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give vague answers. The man who used to tell me everything suddenly had walls up that I couldn't climb. And his family, they started treating me differently too. Not just cold, but almost like I was invisible. At family dinners, they'd discuss business deals and property investments, all while looking right through me like I wasn't sitting at the table. When I'd try to contribute, suggest something from my accounting background, Patricia would smile that tight smile and say, "That's sweet, dear, but this is rather complex." I didn't know it then, but I was already being erased. They were already planning how to get rid of me. And I had no idea what was coming. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I remember because I'd just finished a consultation with a small bakery owner, helping her set up a better bookkeeping system. I was feeling good, productive, like I was building something meaningful even if my marriage felt shaky. I came home early, thinking maybe James and I could talk, really talk for the first time in weeks. But when I opened the door to our condo, I found him packing suitcases. Not vacation suitcases. Everything. His clothes, his shoes, his laptop, all being sorted into boxes with the kind of efficiency that told me this wasn't a sudden decision. This had been planned. I stood there in the doorway, my keys still in my hand, and I couldn't even form words. James finally looked at me, and his face was like stone. No emotion, no warmth, nothing of the man I'd married just 18 months ago. "I think we moved too fast," he said, like he was reading from a script. "This isn't working. My lawyer will be in touch." That's when I noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Divorce papers, already drawn up, already official. I opened them with shaking hands and started reading. The words blurred together, but certain phrases jumped out. Gold digger. Manipulative behavior. Fraudulent intentions. They were accusing me of marrying James for money, of tricking him somehow. I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face, and asked how he could let them do this. How he could stand there and let his family paint me as some kind of con artist when he knew the truth. He knew I'd never asked him for anything, never wanted his money, never even knew about his wealth when we first met. He couldn't look at me. He just grabbed his last bag and walked out. The man who'd promised to love me forever couldn't even give me the courtesy of eye contact as he destroyed my life. The next morning, I found out how deep this betrayal really went. I stopped at the coffee shop I always go to, ordered my usual latte, and my card was declined. Confused, I tried another card. Declined. Then another. Declined. My heart started racing as I mumbled an apology to the barista and rushed outside to call my bank. "I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson," the bank representative said, sounding genuinely sympathetic. "Your accounts have been frozen pending an investigation into suspicious activity." Suspicious activity. I'd had that checking account for 12 years. I'd built my savings slowly, carefully, depositing every extra dollar I could spare. And now it was frozen, locked away like I was some kind of criminal. I called James. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I called his mother's office, and her assistant told me in a cool, professional voice that Patricia was unavailable and had no plans to speak with me. Over the next week, my entire life collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. The condo we lived in? Owned by James's family company, and they wanted me out immediately. I had 30 days to leave. My car got repossessed because the automatic payment bounced when my accounts were frozen. My business started falling apart because word spread fast in the small business community, and Patricia had connections everywhere. Clients I'd worked with for years suddenly found other accountants. One of them, a restaurant owner I'd helped save from bankruptcy, actually apologized before he fired me. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, looking genuinely sad. "But I can't afford to be associated with someone under investigation." Patricia called me personally. I have to think about my business. That's when I understood the scope of what they were doing. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a systematic destruction of my entire existence. They were using their money, their influence, their connections to make sure I had nothing left. No money, no home, no business, no reputation. They were trying to erase me completely. I moved in with my cousin Lisa. She had a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a rough neighborhood, and she gave me her couch without hesitation. God bless her for that. I slept there for 2 weeks, staring at the ceiling at night, trying to understand how my life had turned into a nightmare. The divorce papers sat on Lisa's coffee table, mocking me. According to those documents, I was getting nothing. Zero. Not even my own money back, because it was all frozen. And the accusations in those papers, they were designed to make sure I could never fight back. Who would hire an accountant accused of financial fraud? Who would trust someone painted as a manipulative gold digger? James wouldn't return my calls or texts. The few times I saw him from a distance, usually going into his family's office building, he'd look away quickly, like I was something shameful he wanted to forget. The man who'd held my hand at that first fundraiser, who'd laughed with me over burnt pasta in my old apartment, who'd cried when he proposed, that man was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed at all. His sister Rebecca posted photos on social media at fancy restaurants and clubs, living her privileged life without a care in the world. His mother gave an interview to a business magazine about protecting family assets and being smart about relationships. I knew that interview was about me, even though she never mentioned my name. I spent those first 2 weeks feeling sorry for myself. I cried a lot. I questioned every decision I'd made. I wondered if maybe I should just sign their papers, walk away with nothing, and try to rebuild somewhere else. Maybe change my name, move to a different city, start over completely. But on the 15th day of living on Lisa's couch, something inside me shifted. I woke up angry instead of sad. And that anger, it cleared my head like nothing else could. The anger gave me clarity. I stopped crying and started thinking. And when I thought about it, really thought about it, I remembered something that hadn't made sense at the time. About 8 months into our marriage, I'd gone looking for James one night. He'd been spending more and more time locked in his home office, and I'd started feeling lonely. I just wanted to say goodnight, maybe convince him to come to bed at a reasonable hour for once. His office door was open just a crack, and he wasn't there. But his computer was on, and I could see spreadsheets on the screen. I'm an accountant, spreadsheets are my language, and even from the doorway, something looked wrong. I saw account numbers, transfers, amounts that seemed too large and too frequent. But I'd pushed it out of my mind that night. Rich people have complicated finances, I'd told myself. It's probably normal for them. But now, with nothing left to lose, I started wondering if maybe those numbers weren't normal at all. I borrowed Lisa's laptop and started with simple searches. Public records, business filings, the kind of information anyone can access if they know where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. I'd spent 10 years studying finance and accounting. I'd helped dozens of small businesses navigate tax laws and financial regulations. I understood how money moves, how it gets hidden, how people try to cheat the system. James's family company was called Sterling Development Corporation. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. Property developments, commercial real estate, shopping centers. But when I started digging into their business filings, certain things didn't add up. Shell companies registered in Delaware that seemed to exist only on paper. Contracts with vendors that didn't seem to actually provide any services. Charitable donations to organizations that, when I looked them up, barely seemed to exist. Money flowing in and out in patterns that made my accountant brain start screaming that something was very wrong. I reached out to an old friend from college, a woman named Jennifer who'd become a forensic accountant. She specialized in finding financial fraud for law firms. I sent her everything I'd found and asked if she saw what I saw. She called me back within 2 hours, her voice tight with excitement. "Sarah, where did you get this information?" I explained everything, the marriage, the divorce, the frozen accounts, the accusations. And then I asked her, "Am I seeing things, or is this company doing something illegal?" "This is very illegal," she said quietly. "This is tax evasion, money laundering, fraud. Multiple federal crimes spanning at least 15 years from what I can see here. Sarah, if even half of this is real, this family is going to prison." We spent the next 3 weeks building a case. Jennifer worked with me every evening after Lisa went to bed. We traced money through shell companies, documented fake business expenses, found property deals that existed only on paper, but somehow generated massive tax deductions. The more we dug, the worse it got. Patricia's charitable foundation, the one she was always talking about in interviews, was a complete scam. It barely gave any money to actual charities. Instead, it was being used to move money offshore, to pay for personal expenses disguised as business costs, to hide income from the government. And James, quiet, sweet James, who'd seemed so uncomfortable with his family's wealth, he wasn't uncomfortable at all. He was the architect. He designed this entire system, set up the shell companies, created the false contracts. His business degree from an expensive university wasn't just for show. He'd built an empire of fraud, and his mother had used her connections and reputation to keep anyone from looking too closely. Then something unexpected happened. I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "You're not the only one they've hurt." I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But something made me open it. Inside was a message from someone who'd worked at Sterling Development for 12 years. They'd seen things, suspicious things, and when they'd started asking questions, they'd been fired and threatened with legal action if they ever talked about the company. This person had kept copies of documents, emails, internal memos. They were sending them to me because they'd heard through mutual connections about what Patricia had done to me. "They destroy anyone who gets in their way," the email said. "It's time someone stopped them." More people reached out over the next week. A former business partner who'd been cheated out of millions. An employee who'd been pressured to falsify reports. A contractor who'd been threatened when he refused to submit fake invoices. All of them had pieces of the puzzle, and all of them wanted to see this family face consequences. I spent another week organizing everything into one comprehensive file. Tax evasion going back 15 years. Money laundering through the charitable foundation. Wire fraud involving fake business deals. False statements to federal agencies. Bank fraud. Real estate fraud. The charges were devastating. Patricia could face 25 years in federal prison. James could get 20. Rebecca, who'd been signing documents for years without asking questions, could get 10. The company would be destroyed, all assets seized by the government. The family name that Patricia had spent her entire life building and protecting would become synonymous with corruption and greed. I sat at Lisa's kitchen table at 2 a.m, looking at everything I'd compiled, and I had to make a choice. I could take this evidence straight to the FBI and watch them all burn. I could get my revenge by destroying them completely, the way they'd tried to destroy me. Part of me wanted that. Part of me wanted to see Patricia in handcuffs, wanted James to understand what it felt like to lose everything, wanted them all to experience the fear and helplessness they'd made me feel. But another part of me, the practical part that had kept me alive and fighting all these years, saw a different path. A better path. I called Patricia's personal lawyer on a Monday morning. His name was Douglas Wright, and he'd been representing the family for 30 years. I told his secretary I needed a meeting, just him and me, and that it was urgent. He called me back within an hour, probably expecting to intimidate me into signing the divorce papers. We met at a coffee shop far from downtown, away from anywhere someone might recognize him. He showed up in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase, looking at me like I was wasting his valuable time. I brought one USB drive. I slid it across the table and watched his face as he opened his laptop and plugged it in. I'll never forget the next 5 minutes. I watched the color drain from his face as he scrolled through the files. His hands started shaking. He looked up at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. I leaned forward and spoke quietly but clearly. "I'm very good at my job, Mr. Wright. I've always been good at my job. Your clients made the mistake of forgetting that." He tried to compose himself, tried to slip back into lawyer mode, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "What do you want?" "Tell Patricia I want a meeting. The whole family. Tomorrow. And tell her to bring her checkbook, because this is going to be expensive." The meeting happened on Tuesday afternoon at the family estate. I drove there in Lisa's old car, wearing a borrowed suit jacket, carrying my evidence in a simple folder. When the gates opened and I drove up that long driveway, I felt more powerful than I'd ever felt in my life. They were all there in the formal living room. Patricia sitting in a high-backed chair like a throne. Rebecca perched on the sofa looking nervous. James standing by the window, unable to look at me. Douglas the lawyer was there too, along with 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. I didn't sit down. I didn't accept the water they offered. I just stood in the center of that expensive room and started talking. "I've spent the last month learning everything about your family business," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I have to say I'm impressed. You've been running this fraud operation for 15 years, and nobody caught you. That takes skill, planning, and a lot of nerve. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I have documentation of every illegal transaction, every fake business expense, every dollar you've hidden from the government. Tax evasion, money laundering, wire fraud, bank fraud, real estate fraud. I have witnesses ready to testify. I have emails, memos, bank statements, everything. I pulled out a printed summary and handed it to Douglas. He'd already seen it on the USB drive, but I wanted everyone in the room to understand what I had. The federal government is very interested in this kind of thing, I continued. The IRS doesn't like it when rich people hide millions in offshore accounts. The FBI doesn't appreciate money laundering through fake charities. And federal prosecutors love cases like this because they're so clear-cut. I watched Rebecca start crying. James looked like he might be sick. Patricia's perfect mask was cracking, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw real fear in her eyes. Patricia, I said, looking directly at her, you could be looking at 25 years in federal prison. James, probably 20. Rebecca, maybe 10 if they believe you were just signing what they told you to sign. All the money, all the properties, everything the government can seize. And the publicity, oh, the publicity. Your name in every newspaper, every news website. The wealthy Chicago family who thought they were above the law. Patricia finally found her voice, though it shook. What do you want? I pulled out a piece of paper with my terms written clearly. First, you unfreeze every single account. Mine, the joint accounts, everything. And you compensate me for every penny I've lost, every client I lost, every day of my life you stole. I'm thinking $2 million covers it. Douglas started to object, but I cut him off. Second, you make phone calls. Patricia, you personally call every single person you spoke to about me. Every client, every business owner, every social contact. And you tell them the truth, that I did nothing wrong, that the accusations were false, that your family made a terrible mistake. Third, recommendation letters. Personal letters from Patricia to the top accounting firms in Chicago, opening every door you slammed shut. Fourth, the divorce settlement. I want $5 million and a written statement that I married James in good faith and did nothing wrong. The room erupted. Rebecca was openly sobbing now. James finally turned from the window, his face pale. Patricia started to stand, to argue, but I wasn't done. And fifth, the most important term. You have 24 hours to agree to all of this. If you don't, I take everything I have to the FBI and the IRS. You can deal with me, or you can deal with federal prosecutors. Your choice. Patricia tried to negotiate. Of course she did. These people had never been told no in their entire lives. She tried to reduce the amounts, tried to limit the phone calls, tried to avoid the public admission of wrongdoing. But I stood there and didn't budge. Not 1 inch. 24 hours, I repeated. After that, the offer disappears and the FBI gets a very interesting package in the mail. I left them there, arguing among themselves, and drove back to Lisa's apartment. I didn't know if they'd agree. Part of me almost hoped they wouldn't, just so I could watch their empire burn. 23 hours later, Douglas called me. They agreed to your terms. The next week was the sweetest week of my life. My bank accounts were restored with an extra $2 million sitting there like a beautiful middle finger to everyone who'd tried to erase me. The frozen investigation disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. All those suspicious activity flags removed by the same connections Patricia had used to create them in the first place. The phone calls were even better. Patricia had to personally call every single person she'd poisoned against me. I didn't hear most of them, but my old client, the restaurant owner, called me afterward. I don't know what happened, he said, but Patricia just called and told me everything she'd said about you was wrong. She practically begged me to work with you again. Sarah, what did you do? I just smiled and told him I'd be happy to help his restaurant again if he was interested. Within 3 days, I had more clients than I'd had before the divorce. Within a week, I had job offers from 3 major accounting firms. Patricia's recommendation letters had worked like magic, opening doors I'd never even dreamed of walking through. The divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. $5 million deposited into my account, along with a legal document stating clearly that I had married James in good faith and had done nothing wrong. James signed everything without argument. I heard later that he'd moved out of the city entirely, unable to face the social consequences of what his family had done. Rebecca tried to reach out about a month later. She sent me a long email apologizing, saying she'd never wanted to hurt me, that she'd just been following her mother's lead. I read it once and deleted it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. James left me a voicemail at some point. I saw his name on my phone and almost didn't listen, but curiosity got the better of me. He was crying, saying he was sorry, saying he'd been weak, that he'd let his mother control him, that he'd never wanted any of this. I deleted it halfway through. His apology meant nothing. He'd had choices every single day of our marriage, and every single day he'd chosen his mother's approval over doing the right thing. That's not weakness. That's cowardice. I didn't take the evidence to the authorities. I'd shown mercy, which was more than they deserved. But I kept everything, every document, every email, every bank statement. I backed it up in 3 different locations, stored copies in safety deposit boxes, sent encrypted files to trusted friends. Insurance, in case they ever forgot the lesson I'd taught them. But I did make sure certain details leaked into their social circles. Nothing specific enough to trigger legal action, but enough that everyone knew Sterling Development wasn't as clean as it pretended to be. Business deals fell through. Their charitable foundation lost donors. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. They weren't destroyed, but they were damaged, their reputation tarnished in the circles they cared about most. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I bought my own house. It's in a good neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. Nothing like the massive estate Patricia lives in, but it's mine. Every brick, every window, every flower in the garden belongs to me. Nobody can take it from me, nobody can threaten me with eviction, nobody can use it as leverage against me. My business grew beyond my wildest expectations. Turns out being the woman who outsmarted old money makes you very attractive to new money. Young entrepreneurs, small business owners who've been ignored by traditional firms, people who appreciate someone who understands what it's like to build something from nothing. I'm more successful now than I was before I met James, and I did it all on my own terms. These days, I spend some of my time mentoring other women who've been through similar situations. Women who've been financially abused by wealthy partners or their families. Women who've been isolated, controlled, made to feel small by people with more power and money. I teach them what I learned. I teach them that knowledge is power, that documentation is protection, that understanding how money works can save your life. I teach them that people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And I teach them that your comeback can always be stronger than their attack, as long as you refuse to give up. Sometimes I drive past the Sterling Development offices downtown. I see their name on the building and I smile. They tried to erase me, tried to bury me, tried to make me disappear like I'd never existed. They used all their money, all their influence, all their connections to destroy me. But I came back. Louder, stronger, richer, and more successful than they ever expected. And every time they see my name in the business section of the newspaper, every time they hear about another client I've helped, every time they drive past my house or see my car, they remember. They remember that they underestimated the wrong woman. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. That woman was too trusting, too willing to ignore warning signs, too eager to believe that love could bridge any gap. The woman I am now is harder, wiser, more careful about who she lets into her life. Some might say I'm jaded, but I prefer to think I'm educated by experience. And the best part? I did it all legally, ethically, using nothing but my own skills and knowledge. They were the criminals. I was just the accountant who knew how to read their books. So if you're out there right now going through something similar, if someone with money and power is trying to make you disappear, remember this. Your knowledge is your weapon. Your documentation is your shield. And people who underestimate you always live to regret it. Never let them see you broken. And never, ever stop fighting for what's yours.